He must be on more committees than any other Senate: banking, housing and urban affairs, budget, commerce, science and transportation, rules and administration, and joint economic committee. And we have the thinnest sliver of his time. His staff was saying, don't go to this infrastructure conference. Don't do it. Because he's at a markup right now that he really cares about it. But he said, we've got to come. And I really thank you so much for being here. Please give a warm round of applause to Senator Mark Warner.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. And let me thank the Atlantic, thank all of you for showing interest in this area. I know you have heard from my good friend Rosa DeLauro about her approach. I know you've heard from John Kerry, who I'm proud to partner with on the BUILD Act. I want to just hit what I think are a couple of the high points around this issue that, and try to add a little bit of a sense of urgency. We think you wouldn't be here if you're not kind of proactively forward. I see somebody like Bernard Schwartz here who's been arguing this case for 20+ years, 25+ years that I've been around politics. But we really, this is more than just immediate jobs. This really goes to the heart of America's competitiveness. I mean, our infrastructure through most of the 20th century was a competitive advantage vis-a-vis our competitors around the world. We've actually had a disinvestment in infrastructure since the 1970s as a percentage of GDP. We're down to about 2% at this point, John, aren't we? And you look at Europe, of all places, has leapt ahead of us. China at 9%, Europe at 5% investment of GDP. We have a declining source of revenue that funds our basic transportation infrastructure that has two competing policy goals. On one hand, thank goodness we're moving to more fuel-efficient vehicles, but if we base a lot of our transportation infrastructure around a gas tax, that's a declining source of revenue. It's not coming back. So how do we sort through this conundrum is at a moment when, candidly, there is very little appetite for large additional public investments in a traditional sense. And if you think this is a problem right now, and perhaps the thing that I'm most involved in right now, other than these committees, which is the fact that I'm on a bunch of them is just a reflection of the fact that I'm the new guy here, and they stick you on a bunch of them that don't always get a lot of stuff done, which may be the whole Senate this year. But involved in this bipartisan effort to grapple with the debt and deficit. And we as a nation are kind of like Thelma and Louise about to race over the cliff with the most predictable financial crisis in our lifetimes. And we basically don't have most of our traditional tools left. We've used monetary policy, we've used fiscal stimulus, we've used bailout, and that means that where a lot of the focus on cutting has been, most of the whole debate so far has been around domestic discretionary spending. And guess what, folks? As you well know, domestic discretionary spending includes every bit of a federal investment in infrastructure. This is not a time to kind of play off deficit plans, but it does relate to this issue. One of my greatest concerns with Congressman Ryan's plan, I had concerns about his questions around Medicare and what have you. But that 12% of domestic discretionary spending, which is all of our research and development, all of our education investment at the federal level, all of our infrastructure investment, all of our energy investment, net 12%, he would take that percentage down to about 5 to 6% over a 25-year period. Tell me what industrial country in the 21st century can compete without any investment in infrastructure, energy, R&D, and what have you. Again, that's not a critique of the plan as much as it is we've got to think about different ways to skin this cat. And I commend Rosa for her efforts on her approach. I am intrigued, and I'm sorry I missed the earlier panel about how you get the specifics of this right. I think that is a real challenge. I think that what Senator Kerry and Senator Hutchinson and I have done with this Build America Act, it is more modest. It is $10 billion. It is only loans rather than grants. It doesn't, as Rosa mentioned, have the bonding authority. There may be other ways to improve it, but we've got to crack the code on alternative ways to invest in infrastructure. As Governor of Virginia, I was proud of the fact that we put forward one of the first public-private partnerships in Virginia. And, for those of you who live in the region, I'd love to say that solved all of the region's transportation problems. It hasn't. But it is a new tool, just as this infrastructure investment bank is not going to solve all our problems. But it ought to be a tool. And one of the challenges that we have in terms of leveraging private money, I'll close with this comment, and I know maybe we're going to take some questions, was that? Or were they kicking me out, or what are you doing with me? All right, because I got to go do the deficit pitch in a minute, is that, and I would love to get from the experts in this room reflection on that. On this, two questions. One is, could we, if we put together a infrastructure investment bank, and this would be not part of the Kerry proposal, so this is an independent Warner idea, but I desperately believe that one of the other challenges we have in America on infrastructure projects is the time from idea to actually moving earth. Our regulatory and permitting process has really dramatically expanded over the years. Now, we need to do that and make appropriate environmental reviews, appropriate other permitting reviews. But when we are so far behind the 8 ball, when the world's fastest bullet train is in Shanghai rather than America, we ought to at least explore, for at least certain designated projects, an ability to expedite the review and approval process, because, as we all know, time is money. And if we can shorten that approval process, at least for certain, particularly energy-related projects, it ought to be in the mix, number one. Number two, we really need to push the edge from some of the better financial minds about how we get this right. I would argue that the last decade, the only place that we had real innovation in America was in the financial sector. And that innovation that was supposed to be about lowering the cost of risk, in many cases we found really created a bunch of financial instruments that, rather than lowering cost of risk, kind of tied things into this financial house of cards. I was the co-founder of Nextel, so I don't mind your cell phone being on, sir. Doesn't bother me at all. But I do think with the, we almost in a certain way, with the ability for capital to move globally so quickly, and the ability to have things where you can trade an overnight currency exchange on what would be a so-called limit or risk-free basis to guarantee a return, how do we have, with this infrastructure bank, and perhaps with even changes to the tax code, incentives to really have patient capital investment again? Because at the end of the day, unless you've got patient capital, unless you've got really a value towards long-term capital, we're not going to get it right. The infrastructure investment bank that we've proposed, which would help buy down interest rates, which would help fill this gap, I think is one of those tools. It is affordable, it is bipartisan, it can be leveraged many, many times based upon anyone's analysis, even in these tight deficit times. It is a critical piece of not just the direct jobs that it would create, but I believe, and I'll close with this, that the greatest job creation effort we could take on right now. And the infrastructure is a piece of this. Frankly, getting the deficit plan in place is a piece of this, is getting that $2.2 trillion in cash that's sitting on American balance sheets off the sidelines, reinvested in America. Part of that is showing that we in Congress have got the wherewithal to meet our deficit problems over the long haul. Secondly would be to actually have a plan in place so that as we start to remanufacture and rebuild in America, we've got the infrastructure to move those goods and ideas in a 21st century way. So my thanks to the Atlantic, my thanks to all of you, and let's see if we can get this done. Thank you very much.
Senator, thank you so much. I would just say, as we're just short on time, and we want, I see Nick over here trying to get us out, get the senator out of the room, but I do want to invite in a moment, we're going to have a very good exchange between, I'm going to ask you one question, because Kay Bailey Hutchison is coming. Here's the quick question. How deep do you think the support is in the Republican caucus, as you see it, for the same sort, if not the plan, the notion about investment in the country? Is there a larger sense that that matters in a significant way vis-a-vis other things? And maybe just a quick answer.
Great question. Infrastructure investment has been one of those areas that for years has been a bipartisan issue, not a Democrat or Republican road, or water system, or frankly, fiber optic network. There is enormous pressure right now. And and some of it is, I'm not here to criticize, because the worst thing that could happen to building infrastructure, the worst thing that could happen to job creation, is a default on our debt, which might see an interest rate spike to 8 or 10 or 12 or 15%. You say that's not possible, but listen, credit default swaps in terms of making sure the price of a credit default swap today on the chances of Americans default in August is higher than the price of guaranteeing there's not going to be a credit default for Mexico, for Panama, for the Philippines. So in effect, the markets are already saying they are a better bet than we are. $14.5 trillion of debt, we add $4 billion a day to. This is an imminent problem that we have to deal with. Now, we have more runway, so I do think our Republican colleagues, are very concerned about that. We and the Democrats are as well. It's going to take a balance on both sides. I think what we have put together, and again, Senator Kerry is the lead sponsor on this, and he's done the yeoman's amount of work, is an approach that is doable at this $10 billion number, that starts this ball rolling, that focuses on loans. In a more perfect world, a broader approach might be better, but this has got the support of the chamber, the labor community, and part of my job is to say, even in these tight times to our Republican colleagues, this is a revenue generator and a job generator, and I think we can very well make that case.
Senator, thank you.
You.
Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Mark Warner.